Let's find out. Thanks, guys.
Well, thanks. You know, if I've learned anything in my 15 years in the internet, is if the Dutch are pissed at you, you got problems. So I was thinking about this panel, and oddly, the term Ronco, the Showtime rotisserie, sort of came into mind. I don't know if everyone remembers this. I don't know if they're still on at 2 or 3 a.m. I'm not up that late normally anyway. But at 2 or 3 a.m., you'd see these wonderful little infomercials for the Showtime rotisserie, and it's the idea that you put the little thing into a chicken or into your turkey, and then you set it, and it rotates for a while, and then it's magically done in X number of hours. And their big slogan was "Set it and forget it." And so rather than talk about chickens, we're going to talk about marketing and advertising spend. But I think the concept is the same, where we've got all these automated technologies that are coming onto the marketplace now that are designed so that the advertiser can just set it and forget it. And so I'm going to have each of the panelists here introduce themselves and to give us a 20 to 30 second overview of where they fit in the marketplace, because I think we've got kind of a unique mix here.
Thanks. Yoav Ornstein, I'm CEO of Legolas Media. We basically automate audience buying from premium publishers, enabling marketers to leverage their own data and do audience upfronts directly from the likes of AOL, Microsoft, and other big publishers.
I'm Phil Fernandez. I'm CEO and co-founder of Marketo. I'm a little bit of a stranger in a strange land here because I don't do audience targeting, although we tie into systems like that. But for example, Dell uses our system to tie into not only their advertising and their online advertising, but their salespeople, their own website, their email marketing, their offline events, seminars, webinars, et cetera, and automate individual customer dialogues across all of those channels and over time with everybody that interacts with them, so that ultimately we drive people towards revenue generating outcomes. And so I look at automation not just from a data perspective, but also from a customer dialogue perspective.
Hi, I'm Eric Hansen. I'm actually listed in the program as a COO of Resonate, which I'm not. I'm the CEO and founder of SiteSpect. And like my colleague here, who feels like maybe a fish out of water, I spend my days working on site-side optimization, so not ad networks or not reach per se, but what do people do once they're on your site? So my company, SiteSpect, does things like A/B and multivariate testing, site-side behavioral targeting, and a variety of other things that essentially influence and optimize the experience once you're on the site.
Well, thanks, Eric. So apparently, Mark and Nick were not able to follow the directions.
They told us the wrong order. Fine. I'm actually Mark Kiven.
All right, Mark.
Hi, I'm Mark Kiven, founder and chief revenue officer of BrightTag, and we help marketers and their analysts create a universal data set from the data that is generated off their websites to make it easier for them to work with these companies up here and to do the things they need to do to drive these more real-time initiatives as it relates to media and site optimization and content optimization as well. So.
Hi, I'm Nick Tabal. I'm the SVP of Research at Resonate Networks. So Resonate is an audience targeting and insights company. We either run the media ourselves or we provide insights around campaigns, and we're all about the why. So who the people are and why they buy certain things. And we actually, our roots are in politics and public affairs, so it's why people vote a certain way and why people choose certain brands. So the values that drive purchase decisions and brand choice.
Okay, well, thanks, panelists. And so, a little bit about me. 10 years ago, I was working at Cheetah Mail, the then burgeoning email service provider. And so when I think of a panel that talks about, closed loop, automated system, customer contact point, I remember that's sort of what we were selling at Cheetah Mail back in the days, where we'd go to an advertiser and say, hey, somebody goes to this section of your site, it'll trigger an email that'll go to them, and that will, that'll increase your ROI by X%. And so I guess my first question is, how have we come very far in the 10 years? And if so, how?
Oh, we don't use email. No, but I think it became just much more complicated. And when we spoke before, and you mentioned, is it a channel issue? Are there other factors that basically made it more complicated and sometimes less automated? I really think it's down to consumption. Steve Jobs irritatingly created the iPhone, made consumption even more fragmented, more difficult to measure. A lot of it goes so that Mark Zuckerberg can now buy 10,000 New York Knicks tickets without losing money. So people are consuming media in so many more ways, and email, even though it's still such an important part for each and every one of us, became more difficult. So measuring it is also more challenging. I see over the last maybe 2 years many more companies and more technologies that are focusing on attribution, which is basically acknowledging this additional complexity and actually giving channels the right credit. So I think to that question, it is a channel issue mostly and a consumption problem.
I mean, I think, I already introduced myself as a multi-channel guy, but I think we've come tremendous distance in being able to break down the barriers between all the channels and leverage data gained through any given place you meet a customer, through an entire customer journey or customer relationship. And I've been chasing this holy grail for 10 years, and it's only in the last 2 or 3 that we've been able at scale with the world's largest companies run true real-time multi-channel recommendation and tracking across online and offline channels, call centers, salespeople, as well as online properties. And make sense of all that at scale with the kind of data that throws off, and understand how to, as Yoav said, do things like attribution, and understand in many buying circumstances, there might be 5, 10, 15, 20, or 40 touches. And I think for the first time, certainly from our company and others, we've just cracked the code of how to start to tease apart the costs and do the attribution problems so you really know how to track investments to revenue outcomes.
Go ahead.
Oh.
Yeah, we don't have to go in order, guys.
Yeah,
We can.
All right. Well, I'll make this short. I think broad stroke, the technology and the techniques have been around for a long time to be able to do this. I mean, even in the last week, there's been a number of news stories around Target, the company doing targeting. They've been doing this for a long, long time with offline, and I think the headline was something like Target knows your daughter is pregnant before you do, or something along that lines. But what we see, or what I see in my day-to-day, is not so much can we do it, but are we ready to do it, and have we gotten our other ducks in a row? I mean, I still see fairly large site operators and advertisers that don't really, I think, have a good grip on their measurement or accuracy thereof. So clearly, something like that, needs to be dealt with and addressed, at least in parallel. But ideally, I think people do that before they're ready for the next step of any type of personalization or automated targeting or whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what Eric's saying here, and that is, this has been around for a long time, and I think, you touch on the fact with email, and email certainly set the stage for everything we wanted to do into the future and are doing now, but, unfortunately, because of this massive amount of fragmentation, we find ourselves working in silos, and we as an industry now have to figure out how to continue to break those silos down so it can be, a comprehensive, attributable approach to, your media and marketing spend as a client, and we as an industry then have to work hard to, create a better data infrastructure that allows for that more normalized and readily real-time ability to go do these things.
And just a quick comment. So we went from doing feedback loops within individual channels. Now we're doing it across channels. And I think, in the next 5 years, maybe, I think hopefully the feedback loops will go outside of advertising and into maybe product development and other parts of the company, and, have an automated loop that goes across the company and feeds new product ideas and not just the advertising ecosystem.
So at risk of making this into a, yes, it's decent now, it's going to be much better years from now when the same things that we've been talking about for 12 years go away, what are some of the things that happen to make, for example, Mark, those silos break down? Or for Nick, what are some of the things that need to move this type of a concept further into organizations?
I equate it to, if you remember the days when you had a printer and a scanner and other peripherals sitting around your desktop, and each one of them came with their own kind of CD or floppy disk of their software that you had to run, to load onto your computer to make those peripherals run. Today we have a universal, serial bus that you plug it in and it just works. And we need that type of interoperability within the industry, to make things work at scale.
I think the interoperability needs to work not just with the technology and the data, but also the taxonomy and the, we're talking earlier about how web analytics people, marketing folks don't understand each other. That's right. And now we're talking about kind of marketing and advertising, talking to product development. I think creating common language will probably be.
Which then leads into what you said about feeding into product development, and and you have now it becomes business intelligence and predictiveness about how your business is going to operate. I think that's where we're headed.
But my question though then is there a platform now that exists that can do these things, or is it strictly the cultural issue?
I'm not sure it's the culture issue. I think also a lot of the advancement that people are talking about are related to response-driven advertisers that have a relatively easy time measure the value of any marketing effort they're actually putting forth. And then we moved from one channel 2 to now 10, and maybe they can even measure all these 10 together with the right attribution model. I believe still majority of the dollars are spent on branding. I don't think there is a machine today that can consolidate everything and figure out the human mind of how a human will actually establish a positive brand impact versus a not so positive one. So I think some of it will continue and remain science as pertains to the majority of the dollars that actually are spent in the US.
I actually think there's a huge cultural issue, though, that's still at work. I was back in New York here 2 weeks ago at American Express down at World Financial Center and had just an amazing experience. I was in a room of about 20 people, about half of which were their data targeting people that could micro-segment card candidates in the most amazing ways that we all know and can generate and understand their audience perfectly. And half the room was customer experience people who were trying to think about what is the customer journey we're trying to take people through. And I was sort of felt like the moderator of this, complete cultural divide where the people were literally on the left half of the room and the right half of the room, and they didn't even speak the same language. They didn't have the same ideas, and they had all the tools they need, but they didn't have any kind of understanding of how to bring together the segmentation and the targeting with the customer experience and what they were trying to get in terms of outcomes. And I think until we break down those cultural barriers, all the tools in the world aren't going to let this stuff do what it really could do to drive revenue in companies.
I go through that every day with one of my biggest clients, and that cultural barrier, especially from the user experience group versus the analytics and media group, not understanding each other's needs, and the site experience group more so from the perspective of my site better load fast. Stop taxing it with all your data demands, and let it load fast, because I do the research every day that shows that conversion rate is higher when my site loads fast.
But the question is how many of this is dependent? If you look at an overall marketer and the amount of sales he's looking to generate, for many of them out there, how much is dependent on the actual website? Because I think if everything said is correct when it comes to a client is actually looking at his website, the traffic, and try and figure out how to gain some learnings from that. But increasingly, a lot of the opinions are being shaped outside the client's website. I'm not sure it will become or continue and be such an important aspect for a consumer to go to a client website and be influenced by what is going on out there. advertising is one, social media is another. So many things are happening other places that are really critical to understand and are much more difficult to analyze.
So I agree with you, Yoav, but I almost think we're talking about slightly different things, because if the focus of this discussion is going to be, how does somebody get X percentage of users pushed nudged in the right direction to increase revenues just on the site by Y percent, then am I to understand that technology does exist? Because I happen to agree with you on the media buying side, but I'm getting some nods here. So yeah. Who's doing it?
Yeah, absolutely site optimization tools. There's a lot of tools that are out there that are designed around, improving the user journey and improving the content on the site as the user is making their way through the site to drive conversion rates. And that's also derived from both the interactive data on the site as well as could be potentially one day from the media data. There's a lot of talk of that, and testing going on of using data from the outside, third-party data and media interaction data to drive site conversion.
So let me take a little bit of a contrarian thought here. When a lot of what we're talking about here is sort of a code for this one-to-one marketing concept. Everybody familiar with the Peppers and Rogers one-to-one marketing? And I think they've since sort of repudiated a lot of the findings from their own book. And I don't mean any disrespect to them, but is the real concept of one-to-one marketing even something that's desirable?
Absolutely.
Okay.
If you think about it, there's individual buyers and they're each on an individual journey, ultimately. And some notion that they're not on an individual journey. We all buy cars at a different time, or we all do whatever we do at a different time. And we all interact with social media, we interact with websites, we interact with advertisements, we interact with buyer sites, whatever it might be out there. And if you give that clock any amount of time to run, everybody ends up on their own, their own path and their own way. And I think if you don't start to treat people and continue to treat people as individuals, you just end up with people, you're not speaking their language to them, and they fall out.
No, we say one-to-one, but it's really a grouping, right? You don't really have a pure, holistic one-to-one, but I definitely think there's finer and finer segmentations that marketers are trying to do to make it as close to one-to-one as possible.
Well, I disagree. I think you can absolutely do it on a one-to-one basis.
I don't think when it comes to actually activating it, it's not very scalable. At least again, I think there is a difference between what's happening on a client website and what's happening out. Because on a client website, I agree 100%. The universe you're dealing with is much more limited in size, and definitely it can be done as a one-to-one. I think outside, from a marketer perspective, it's becoming a really difficult and not financially viable task.
So we think about that question of, is it one-to-one, or is it, that's kind of one end of the continuum. The other is just completely untargeted. Everyone gets the same experience, right? I might be paraphrasing a little bit, but I do think it's a segmentation issue. How fine-grained do you get? Is there something that's specific about this one user across 20 million people that come to my site each month, that only that one user is going to get this combination of content? That's that one end of the extreme. But I think, technically those things are possible. They've been possible for a long time. And maybe I'm merging in the previous question, but I do think, again, it's more of a cultural thing, where what are our priorities right now? And when you get different organizations, different departments, different stakeholders within a company, one guy on the technical side says, well, I don't really care what you do as long as it doesn't slow down our site by 1 microsecond. It's a millionth of a second. And then someone else says, well, we can lose some speed as long as we improve the user experience because we want to show something that's more relevant and engaging. And how do you meet in the middle? And all too many times what I see is that's a stalemate. The cases where everyone does rally behind is when the CEO or a high-level exec says, we're going to do this. Not everyone is going to win. Not everyone is going to lose. But at the end of the day, the end user, we need to create a measurably better experience for the end user. And the example I like there is Overstock.com. Their CEO is engaged with analytics tools, and really everything that they do around voice of customer testing and optimization. Maybe not on a day-to-day basis, but he keeps an eye on this stuff, and he's really just laid down the line and said, whatever we do, we need to, be balancing the demands and the interests across the whole organization, and ultimately that's where we see this kind of integration happening. But more often than not, I see people siloed, and unfortunately, just not yet. They just haven't prioritized the kind of drive towards the deeper segmentation, towards the one-to-one side of the continuum.
So, there seems to be a bit of a philosophical shift, and not just on this panel, but I think this panel is sort of emblematic of the larger cultural shift within the industry, because I see us heading away from kind of the concept of audience creation, and not that that isn't still part of the mix. But if you think of the traditional ad network model where somebody is selling, X million uniques with, summer travel and they're this age or whatever, and moving towards a broader multi-channel advertiser enablement model, probably typified by, you can look at what some of the DSPs are doing or even the DMPs, this concept that, the advertiser is becoming a larger and larger player across the spectrum, not only with what's going on the four corners of their site, but as you have rightly mentioned, in the concept of their own larger media buys. And I just wondered if anybody had any kind of thoughts on that idea and how what you're doing is kind of fitting into that. Well, this is the jump ball.
Yeah, jump ball. It ultimately comes down to to the data sets and and what data sets are available. And you talk about an ad network, and I think that being kind of that starting point for audience creation in the past. Well, the starting point's changed, right? We now have technologies that make it easier to get access to that gold mine, that untapped gold mine of first party, that site user intent-based data, or at least that site user data that you can extrapolate into intent, much in the same manner that the ad networks have done. And the DMPs now are providing kind of that centralized ability to do that, and also pulling in offline databases and whatnot that then drive towards ultimately that one-to-one message.
I think we see with some clients we work with that even though there's a lot of sophistication in media buying and the way data is being leveraged, that still when it comes to providing credit to different types of ad spend, digital is being bucketed together. So while it serves Legolas Media really well, that people will use more data and more programmatic buying of media, which we're proponents of, I really feel that it will be the best thing for the industry if every marketer will have first the ability to take measurements of something finer than just digital, and I think this is really missing.
Yeah. So I agree. Well, that combining kind of first-party data, advertiser data with third-party data is kind of the holy grail, and then combining that and making it media actionable is really. And so learning from, as you're running the campaign, learning what's working, learning who's responding to the campaign, and then going back and targeting those people and just kind of keeping that feedback loop going by combining all these data sets is, I think, kind of where you create the most value. I think big advertisers have the ability to do that, and smaller advertisers probably need kind of more outsourced solutions.
Well, how does that end up operating within each of your services or platforms? This may not be as relevant to you, Mark, but well, maybe it is. But when I hear advertiser data, or a lot of that tends to come from interactions that, as Yoav said, don't occur in the digital world. How much of that? How much is the offline advertiser data really part of the mix? Not only in a broadly analytic site optimization view, but in a larger media buy view.
I mean, for anybody, ultimately it is the holy grail to be able to use all data that's available as it relates to the customer interaction. I think it's somewhat wishful thinking to get down to a specific one-to-one level, but it's of marketing, and it probably isn't 100% scalable, but using all that data to drive a programmatic or a program around one-to-one. I mean, if I walk into Nordstrom today and I buy a shirt, they ask me for my name and address, and I get a nice card, the next day, or a couple days later. That's one-to-one marketing. And are they literally going out and buying shirts based upon the shirt that I bought? No, but they're assembling the data. It's a program around how they communicate with their customers. And so and then being able to tie that to all the other data sets ultimately will drive that the success that I think we're all looking for by combining all of this data.
No, we see them much more. I think Datalogix is present here, Targus Info, Symphony IRI, companies that are investing time with marketers to try and digitize a lot of the customer-based data. Naturally, in order to continue and adhere to privacy rules, we will have some limitation of the accuracy of it, but there's much more that can be measured than post-campaign offline, and my gut feeling in 4 or 5 years it will be a norm, even with a lot of the brick-and-mortar shops, large advertisers. The question will be whether the model was built to really evaluate things correctly, but I think the backbone of the ability to do that will be there in 5 years.
Phil, are you seeing that with some of the work you're doing as well?
Well, we're seeing, I think, just some people moving incredibly forward rapidly again along the customer experience, the customer journey, trying to understand and pull together and correlate data of early acquisition, early engagement, and tie that all the way down to what are the revenue outcomes that happen at the far end of a customer experience, and to start to understand how to feed that loop back into early stage targeting and early stage acquisition programs. And I think that's really the forefront. Is so many and certainly in various kinds of e-commerce models or certain kind of models, you can do that all within one site or all within one property. But in many just this vast number of models, you really need to get into offline data and get into events that happen way far distant from the acquisition or the early stage engagement. And I think that's that's what we do, is really focus on how do you understand what happens in the end when revenue's put on the board, and what really caused that from start to finish.
So my world again is mainly site side. It's what happens on the site and how do you influence the user on the site. So we collect an enormous amount of behavioral data. So again, it would be during that visit or past visits. Those are things that our customers regularly would use for targeting. And as far as the offline or multi-channel, that is also a big part of what we do. I think more common with certain type of site operators than others, and you could probably intuit which kinds. The ones that are likely to have the data available and the budget and the interest in doing so. So, for example, financial services companies, and actually that solves some of the do we really know this user, or is this anonymous data? Once you're logged in, as an end user, it's kind of all up for grabs. Financial service provider would cross-sell you on products that you don't have, or even people that you're related to may have that you don't. So that's where we tend to see the heavier use of the multi-channel data. Yep.
Do we want to start with questions now? I'm happy to. I've got a couple other questions for the panel, but I want to give the audience an opportunity.
Well, typically we do that at the end, so.
Okay.
Are you keeping track of how much time you have left?
No, normally at things there's a little clock here that tells me.
You have 2 minutes.
We have 10 minutes. So why don't you ask one more question to the panels? Unless
Okay.
we have, how many people have questions right now? Don't be shy. Panelists, let's ask questions to the
I'll start
panelists.
calling names. Where's Bruner?
I'm going to ask questions if nobody does, and my questions are more difficult to answer.
Well, one thing that's occurred to me is there's a couple of different mechanisms here for just kind of obtaining data. There's kind of the survey approach, there's the tag approach, then there's what Eric and the SiteSpec guys are doing, which seems to not operate. It just operates differently. And does anybody want to kind of talk about kind of the merits of one mechanism versus the other?
Well, we So we at Resonate found kind of a gap in the online advertising space where no one was getting at the why. So we decided to go down that path, and the only way we could do it is to survey people. So we survey, we do fairly large-scale surveys, tens of thousands of people a year, hundreds of thousands next year, and we combine that with browsing behavior in order to kind of be able to create targeting algorithms and kind of predict attitudes at the cookie level. So, yeah, we went about it in a very different way, and kind of took some of the traditional research approaches and extended that into the online advertising space, because we feel that that's really what drives brand choice, right? What drives someone to choose a Toyota Corolla over over a Porsche SUV or even a small Porsche is kind of what they're looking to get out of the car, whether they're looking for value or looking for something that's well engineered and shows how successful they've been. So that's kind of what drove us to do that, and we take a different approach.
I live in New York. I'd like the small Porsche, please.
I think that's interesting. You've got this concept of attitudinal data that's now getting thrown in. I mean, we've always had it around in the form of surveys and site intercept surveys and media intercept surveys through Dynamic Logic and ComScore and whatnot. There's also a tremendous amount of interaction data that takes place. What either can be deemed behavioral data that takes place on the site, or that behavioral data that takes place off the site in the form of the interaction with advertising. And one of the areas that has been an area of angst, I guess, for the industry is the access to that to the site-side behavioral data that typically, as I said earlier, taxes the site infrastructure and creates these kind of disparate constituencies internally from meeting everybody's needs as it relates to accessing that data and making it actionable.
So the question was basically data collection technologies. Yeah. So this is usually the kind of question that when I'm on a panel, like fisticuffs break out. So this is a very nice, polite panel. Just like to point that out.
The data collection doesn't matter. I'm going to challenge you guys on that. Smoke signals, shells and beads, sign language, doesn't matter.
Okay, so I'll try to work that into my thing. Yeah.
It's a hard one to work in, Eric.
Without getting promote-y, so yeah, we like Alan said, we do things a bit differently. So SiteSpec basically works a bit like a content delivery network, like a CDN. So traffic routes through us, and we just capture page views, and we understand how people are behaving because we're routing that traffic. And then as far as introducing changes into the content that the end user sees, optimizations, we do the same thing in reverse. We change content that your web server emits before it gets to the end user.
So when you see a page performing better in a multivariate test and an A/B test, you'll then serve that page more frequently.
Yeah.
And raise, you'll achieve greater lift across the site by serving the successful pages more frequently. Can you elaborate at all on that?
So that's actually, I think, one of the kernels of this panel, right, is how do you affect the user experience in an automated way as opposed to a manual way or, human-driven way. And that's right. With campaigns that we run, whether it's an A/B test or a multivariate test or something more sophisticated, we do a real-time analysis, and we weight traffic, uplift traffic or upweight traffic to combinations of changes that are shown to outperform the control, and we downweight traffic to those that have underperformed control. So, in a really visceral kind of intuitive way, that's how it works. And really, that's personalization in a nutshell. We just happen to do it in this non-intrusive approach, so you don't have to change the site, really.
Isn't it more, it's personalization in the aggregate? Because it's almost like you're running a poll.
Yeah, it's personalization with a sliding scale of how big are the segments, basically, and that's that continuum that we talked about. On one end, the segment is the size of 1 or virtually 1, and on the other end, the segment is U.S. versus Asia. You know, it's very broad stroke. Yeah, and that's part of the puzzle.
And I would actually respectfully disagree with my host.
That's okay.
I actually think that the data collection mechanism does matter. I think the transparency of the source.
You don't know what my opinion is yet.
Oh, okay. Well, what is your opinion?
I need yours first.
Well, that's hardly any fun. So I'm going to say that it actually is very important from a transparency standpoint. And leaving aside, because today's not the day for me to go talk about privacy. So leaving that aside,
you're talking like
leaving that aside, just from a business standpoint, you want to know where that data is coming from a marketplace valuation standpoint, so that you have an opportunity to utilize it. Because data that's coming from under the rug is different than data that's on the proverbial gold platter, or at least it is going to be evaluated differently.
Yeah. Okay. So here's the deal: data collection is very important. I just didn't want to talk about data collection because when you talk about data collection, like Eric, I use Google Analytics on SiteSpec's site, and we got 2 million visitors last month. Mr. CEO.
Okay.
Exactly. See his reaction, Eric. We optimized. We did a bit of keyword buying Google, and we got 67 leads for $2 last month.
Great.
See? Do you see the difference? I know Eric from back in Boston. You see the first thing? He actually smiled just a little bit. That's a different dialogue. So when you talk about like data collection, like nobody cares but us, right? And so that's what I mean. It's very important, right? But what are you guys talking about? You're talking about automating, right? If you don't have data collection all set, you're going to fail to automate correctly, right? So it's critical, and necessary, but it's insufficient, right? So we're talking about the volume of data collected by websites. And I'm sorry, we've never met, but
nice to meet you, Josh.
Mark, Judah, with a C. What's the best way to put it? We're talking taking data from third parties, internal databases, vendors, right, and doing something with it. And this idea is like, let's just build an enterprise data warehouse and get the data scientists back there to build us out some totally denormalized schema, right, that actually executes a role app or something, like, right? I'm going to talk technical or whatever, column database, network database, whatever you want to call it these days, right? Same thing. So you're going to basically figure out your ETL from all these sources. You're going to build an ODS, right? You're going to have a nice, pretty schema, right? And you're going to load it with data. And the challenge is, like, how big are your data centers? So that's my challenge to you guys. Like, how do you scale your businesses if what you said is true, right? That the volume of data, and I worked for a very large .com until I left. And ComScore, which I think is a great company, their data is an estimate, right? And it's always lower than the site data because of cookie deletion. So when I'm in analytics in, 65 different countries for 300 different sites, and we did something like X number of tens of millions per month, when I got there, I had responsibility for it all. So like not hiring any of you guys, right? That was my choice. I'm just kidding. But having responsibility for all the data architecture, all the BI, all the governance, right? All the data collection. Oh, let's do it. What's the analytics value chain? Let's do this really quick, and I'll shut up, guys. We've got business question. Why does the site exist? Where are you going to reduce cost or increase revenue, right? What data collection we need to set up? That's the tagging specification, right? Bam, IT. Put the tags on the site. I don't care how you do it. I don't even want to QA it, right? How many people get support for QA for tagging? Right? That's all technology. Shouldn't even be in an analytics team. It's the wrong place for it, right? I'm the business. That's technology. Technology serves the business. Therefore, technology serves me and all of you, right? And that's a very different dialogue than what you'll get from IT. It's going to be like, roadmap, 2015, we'll do your tagging. So you've got the tagging right now, it's QA'd, right? Will it remain on the site is the next question about data collection. Or will the next release, the new engineer they hire in Malaysia or Prague or the Netherlands, look at all these crazy, where's Alex? DCS multi-track asynchronous JavaScript calls, or UTM this, or EVAR that. Doesn't help the functionality of the site, isn't a flow, right? Not important, they strip it off and your tagging's gone. Then all of a sudden, your ETL from whatever internal behavioral source is done, and all your data's wrong. Your prediction's wrong, your automation's wrong, and then it gets out in MediaPost, and then everybody goes to the next vendor, right? So the reason I got you guys up here, right, it's not to bust chops, right, because all these guys are doing fantastically brilliant things on the cutting edge of the internet. And these guys are defining, right, the conversation about automation. This stuff is hard. But the question is, you know, what is the incrementality of doing optimization or automation, right? It's the same thing like social. Coca-Cola, did Joel talk about this? 23 million fans on their Facebook page, 50,000 page views on Facebook per month. Do you think all their fans have never drank Coke? Starbucks coffee? Who cares? Social media, it's all incremental. So my question is, what do you guys think about the incremental value, right, of automation? And is that how you sell it? Like, how do you sell it? Because to me, like, if you're talking to me, I don't need automation because if I'm going to buy you guys, I'm profitable, or I have money, at least now cash flow, right? So what is the incremental return for optimizing my site? I mean, Eric's stuff I've seen work, and he can give me that. And I know all you guys can. So what is it? Is it 10%? Is it the cost of capital? Is it your typical 6%? Is it the 2% conversion rate? What is the incremental value? And this is rhetorical, but that's the challenge, right? What is the incremental value? You guys want to take a stab at that?
I don't sell technology.
Neither do I.
I'm a New York lawyer.
Oh, excellent. I'm a Boston Red Sox fan.
You need software to measure the incremental value.
And, so there we go. So that's the question I would encourage you all to ask when you're evaluating all these vendors is what's the incremental value? Because that's what I would have to defend to Eric if, you know, I worked for Eric.
Well, I'd argue the incremental value is spectacular. I mean, there's still just so much low-hanging fruit of having customers have journeys or experiences that actually get them from initial interest to buying. You know, get that Porsche person from, you know, deciding they have a brand preference to Porsche to understand, you know, what its gas mileage is versus other products, to understand what color they're going to buy and fall in love with it in a configurator and finally walk onto a floor. And if you can guide that journey along every step of the way and personalize the experience at every step of the way with everything that came before, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50% lift is possible. So wildly high ROI on these kinds of investments.
And they are, because I've seen like the models that you come back with and you look at it and you're like, when I say incremental, when it's like hundreds of percent, you're like, is it low-hanging fruit or is it incremental? And I mean, how is it so large? Because these things, if properly done and it's all set up right, they mint you money.
It's business dependent, you know, in terms of how the business operates, the size of the business, but it's absolutely, there's incremental value. I mean, incremental value in and of, you get to put guys like Alan out of business, you know, because you now have a layer of control and transparency over the data collection process, and, you know, that you mentioned earlier. So, you know, the
kids on the wait list to Princeton, man. Don't be putting me out of business.
So, you know, there's incremental value across the entire, you know, the entire, you know, spectrum of, you know, the touch points within the business. You know, from optimization through, you know, the operational components. I mean, those are, you know, and to your points, the scenario you laid out is happening every day.
Oh, it's chronic.
Every day, every hour of the day. And so the incremental value of having good, consistent, quality data that drives these initiatives is huge. Can we put a finger on exactly the percentage of incremental value? Sure, we could probably do, you know, deep studies and have done, you know, many as it relates to the various touch points. But, you know, holistically, you know, it's a lot. And if that story goes on every day and is going to continue on for years,
it's only getting worse.
It's only getting worse. Then, you know, then I would have to argue that there's a tremendous amount of incremental value.
But here's the question we haven't asked: is there just such a large? I get this from a direct response standpoint. Two of the examples that you cited were interesting ones to me because it was what Coke and Starbucks,
right? Just that was a
who really aren't interested in selling stuff necessarily directly on their websites in the same way that Best Buy is. So it's a very different play. And so is the math different there? I mean, how does that operate? Does the, you know?
There is no math. It's a difficult math to create. It's a difficult equation. And
we call it new math, NU with the umlauts. All right.
Yeah, but again, I said it's organizationally, specific. I mean,
Right.
you're going to have massive brands like a Coca-Cola that, yeah, but actually, Coca-Cola is doing a lot of direct response type initiatives on their site and sites around the world, and, as it relates to the things they do from social and music and whatnot. And they want to know user interaction. That drives their brand knowledge and brand interaction, and that's an important aspect of their business. Just to assume that because they don't sell anything, they sell Coca-Cola. That's what they do, and they also protect a brand. And so knowledge is power to a company that sells a lot of beverages and has to protect a very very important brand.
So we've been getting the cutoff sign. The only thing I would just suggest there, though, is I think the Cokes of the world get that this stuff is important. They just don't really understand necessarily what the metrics are around how to evaluate the importance of it.
And I think the reason why is because they're tied in the traditional world, right, with their media mix models and their siloism, and no one gets digital, and it's threatening and ambiguous. And that's why Arrow exists, right, to talk and bring that all together. So I have so many more questions for these guys, but Ken's going to come over and pull me off with the cane. So please give a warm round of applause for the guys driving the bleeding edge right here. And a lawyer. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you, Al. That was fantastic.